So when Nintendo launched the Super Famicom in 1990, it came built in with a long list of great hardware features. But one thing that list didn't include was backwards compatibility with their previous console, the Famicom. And this extended to their international releases, the Super Nintendo and the NES. However, supposedly, and please take this with an enormous grain of salt because I've never been able to find any concrete evidence of this, they did plan to release an adapter for the console that would allow players to play games from their previous system and supposedly showed it off at trade shows. However, it never released, so if you wanted to play games from both consoles, you had to keep the older one. This didn't affect the Super Nintendo's success though, as most people didn't even know what backwards compatibility was at the time. This was the first time they ever had to go through anything like this. However, despite the console lacking any official backwards compatibility with its predecessor, some NES games were released for the SNES. Keep in mind, this isn't a comprehensive list. I mean, I'm dealing with two massive libraries with over 1,000 games, so if I miss anything, kindly let me know. But before we begin, are you still listening to this video with those crappy headphones? That's cool. I don't care. Thanks for watching regardless. So let's get the big one out of the way, Super Mario All-Stars. These are ports of the original NES and Famicom Super Mario games based on the original source code, but it's really hard to tell thanks to all of the not just new, but additional graphics, the rearranged music, and some things in some games are different, like how the jump is infamously glitched in the first two games so you don't bounce back against anything you hit. Those two games probably have the most changes, they're pretty unrecognizable. But everyone knows about this game, so let's move on to more interesting topics. Like Tetris and Dr. Mario for the Super Nintendo. I'm not sure if they used the original source code or not, but they're a good way to ease you into this topic as both games are heavily based on their NES versions. The biggest differences being the updated graphics, new transition screens, and versus modes for both games, including mixed matches. The music is obviously different, but Tetris has the unique distinction of the tracks not being remixes of the NES ones. It was common for Nintendo to release their puzzle games to both the SNES and NES at the same time. They did this with Yoshi's Cookie, Wario's Woods, and Tetris 2 or Tetris Flash. However, these games are completely different from one another. Tetris and Dr. Mario are very clearly just NES ports. Now let's talk about what's probably the most famous example of an NES port on the NES besides Mario All-Stars, Ninja Gaiden Trilogy. This is a port of the 3 Ninja Gaiden games on the NES, just with graphical enhancements. And by graphical enhancements I mean, look, a new color! The 3 games seem to be based on the Japanese versions, so Ninja Gaiden 2 is harder and Ninja Gaiden 3 is easier. So that's neat. There's just one problem with this collection. It sucks. First off, they butchered the music. Take a listen to one of the best musical compositions to come out of an 8-bit system. Now listen to the SNES version. Not all of the music is bad, mind you. Some of it is actually pretty good, but a lot of these songs were horribly butchered. They feel unfinished. But outside of the music and the graphics, they didn't really change anything else, so it's not like they could really do anything else to make the games worse. Well, how about the fact that the games still use the A and B buttons? Look at an NES controller. Now look at an SNES controller. You see the problem here? And you can't remap the buttons. And this is very uncomfortable and awkward. And this came out in 1995, so there was no excuse for something like this. They didn't even take advantage of the fact that they had more buttons that you could have used the special weapons with. I mean, outside of those two major flaws, these are still the same games, completely unchanged, outside of the mild graphical enhancements and other very minor changes. But this is a terrible collection. If you want to play these games, play the originals. Just avoid these altogether. Fun fact though, this wasn't the only time the first game was ported to a next-gen system. That would be the 1992 port of Ninja Ryukenden for the PC Engine. This is pretty much the same game but with some graphical enhancements, including parallax. That makes me sick. It also changes up the music quite a bit, but it's not bad. Still not as good as the originals, but still not bad. I can't really judge this version fully since for some reason they decided to make the pretty easy first boss a million times more difficult, so I couldn't bother to get past it, but from what I played, outside of these sickening backgrounds, it's pretty good. I don't know why Tecmo didn't use this as the basis for Ninja Gaiden Trilogy, but this port was done by Hudson Soft specifically for the PC Engine, so I think I just answered my own question there. Now let's move on to talk about another port of an NES game on the SNES, this time being Pac-Man. And this isn't a solo release or even part of a compilation. It's actually just a mini game hidden in another game. That game being Pac-Man 2 The New Adventures, or Hello Pac-Man as it was originally known as in Japan. Yeah, Pac-Man 2 is not a normal Pac-Man maze game, but rather a point-and-click adventure game. Anyways, this version of Pac-Man can be found in the in-game arcade. It's clearly based on the original Famicom release, but I'm absolutely baffled as to why they bothered to update the graphics. I get why they did it for Tetris and Dr. Mario and Ninja Gaiden, but why upgrade the graphics of Pac-Man? Why would they expect anybody to place any lofty expectations on a port of Pac-Man that's a small bonus minigame in a larger game? It doesn't even look crazy or anything, they just added more color and that's really it. Why? It's so baffling. The game also features Miss Pac-Man as an unlockable game. This feature actually appears in the Genesis version of Pac-Man 2 as well, though despite the similarities, I don't think its port of Pac-Man is based on the Famicom one. And that version replaced Miss Pac-Man with Junior Pac-Man. Yeah, this isn't really anything other than an interesting anomaly. Next, we have Wrecking Crew 98. This is a late life 1998 Japan exclusive sequel to Wrecking Crew that includes the original Wrecking Crew. Now, I really like Wrecking Crew. How much so? It's my favorite game from the Black Void era of Mario games, more so than Donkey Kong and even Mario Brothers. But this port kinda sucks. Gameplay wise, the port is fine, but the original game's wonderful tunes have been butchered. I don't know why, but the sound emulation is terrible in this version. And the colors are super washed out as well. It feels lazy and slapdash, and I wonder why they bothered to even include it on the cart at all. It's strange because the next game I'm going to be talking about released earlier and was made by a third party, yet did a much better job of porting Famicom games to the Super Famicom. And it's what I consider to be the best of these ports on the entire system. Caravan STG Collection. So, a little background. In 1985, Hudson Soft released a Famicom port of Tekkon, or as they would later be known as, Tecmo's arcade shoot-'em-up Star Force. This game would become the centerpiece of Hudson's first ever 1985 Caravan event, a gaming event that they held in major cities across Japan. And the biggest draw of the event was the high score competition. The next year, they needed a similar game for the event, but they had to create their own IP this time, so they created Star Soldier as a sort of pseudo-sequel. In 1987, they would release one more Famicom shoot-'em-up for the event called Hector 87. After this, they would move to the PC Engine, with 1988's headlining game being the baseball game Power League, which proved unpopular, so in 1989, they moved back to having shoot-'em-ups being the headlining games for the events until 1993. In 1995, Hudson would release Caravan Shooting Collection for the Super Famicom, which included the 3 Famicom titles completely unaltered. It's really impressive how they were able to keep everything from the originals intact, including the music. It's a good package and great for anyone who wants to play these games, but also it's kind of disappointing that they didn't bother to include any extras like some of the versions used for the competitions. It would have been a good way to preserve the competition version of Star Soldier, as that's now lost media. But this is a good package, and I'm probably asking too much of a Super Famicom cart. Also, I just need to mention, this wasn't the only time these 3 games were released together in a collection, as they were also released on the Game Boy Advance as Hudson Best Collection Volume 5. It contains pretty much the same level of content as the Super Famicom release, but I wouldn't recommend it because of the ugly squashed down graphics. I would actually recommend Caravan Shooting Collection though, if you already like shoot-'em-ups, because I wouldn't really recommend these titles for beginners. Not even Star Force, despite it being super simple, and Hector 87's life bar absolutely does not make it easier. If anything, it makes you more comfortable with making mistakes. Instead, go play stuff like any of the Xevious games, Capcom shoot-'em-ups, Solar Striker, or any of Treasure's shoot-'em-ups. Finally, we have the last ever game for the Super Famicom, Metal Slader Glory Director's Cut, a 2000 remake of the 1991 Famicom adventure game Metal Slader Glory, with upgraded graphics and music and even some cut content from the original. Now, this game has a super interesting story behind it, but I'm not gonna get into that here. I really don't have much to add about it. The story is a million times more interesting than the game or port itself. I really don't have much to add about that, and that's what I'm here to talk about. So, if you want to hear more about this game, I suggest looking elsewhere. Now, there's one game I was unable to play. That was the port of the Famicom Disk System game Shin Onigashima, Nintendo's first adventure game, to the Super Famicom in its remakeables, the Heisei Shin Onigashima games. The reason I was unable to play it was because you have to beat the game to unlock it, and I was not about to beat a kanji-filled Super Famicom game that I wasn't that interested in just for a short segment of this video. But I didn't want to ignore it, and it does exist. Since I wasn't able to play it, I have no clue if it falls on the Caravan side of the quality coin or the Wrecking Crew side. If you have, let me know. But that's it for officially licensed games. Like I said, I didn't want to cover bootlegs, not because they're not worth discussing, they're just more difficult to discuss. Now I know there's stuff like BS Legend of Zelda and the Dragon Quest remakes for the Super Famicom, but these are clearly remakes and not ports, so they don't fit into my discussion. And it's here that someone's going to comment about how Dragon Quest III actually somehow shares 100% of its source code with the original game or something. But there is a bootleg that I want to talk about. Did you know that the original Super Mario Bros. Was ported to all 3 major systems of the 4th generation? Yeah, I know some people hate the concept of console generations, but come on. They don't bother me that much. Yes, they're obviously a little messy, but they're still kind of a useful resource. Anyways, Super Mario Bros. Was ported to the PC Engine somehow. I have no clue who could have made this. This bootleg just began popping up online everywhere. It's a pretty good straightforward port of the game, and it should be given the fact that the PC Engine was basically designed to be a Super Famicom, more so than the actual Super Famicom. The biggest things you'll notice right away are the washed out colors and the horrible screeching music that I'm thankfully sparing you from. Yeah, play this one with the sound off. Once you start playing, however, there's one big difference that you'll immediately notice. Everything is faster. Now at first I thought this had something to do with the console's CPU or something, But when I got to the end of World 2-2, that's when I realized that for whatever reason, this was a port of the PAL version, as it contains the one real difference between the PAL version and the other versions of Super Mario Bros. If you would like to know what that is, stay tuned, as I'm going to make a video in the future where I explain this. So do the thing you don't like YouTubers telling you to do. Anyways, at the risk of alienating my hardcore audience that has heard this a million times, the reason the game runs faster is because PAL TVs have a slower refresh rate than the NTSC TVs used in North America and Japan. And this game tried to port the version of the game that was optimized to PAL regions to an NTSC console. I hope that makes sense. The game was also ported to the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis, and we actually know who was responsible for this. Mega Drive ROM hacker Mertris in 2010. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Out of these three versions, this is definitely the best. And no, this isn't the version that is better known as Sonic Jam 6 that uses graphics from Super Mario All-Stars. This is a very straightforward port of the NES game. It plays the same as the original and is entirely the same aside from the resolution and credit on the title screen. However, the music is handled by the Mega Drive's Yamaha sound chip, and it sounds pretty good, shockingly. I really like the rendition of the main overworld theme. It's very peaceful and calming. Other than that, it's just Super Mario Bros. It's really only worth playing for the music, which admittedly isn't exactly impressive or anything, and you're already hearing it in the background here. But this is a pretty good and impressive bootleg. Now, you'd think it would have stopped there, like, haha, what if we ported the iconic Nintendo game to two other consoles that aren't Nintendo consoles? Wouldn't that be kinda funny? And that's it. But in 2017, a direct port of the NES game was made for the SNES by P4+2. The colors are awfully bright, though not as washed out as the PC Engine version. And it uses the Super Mario All-Stars sounds and soundtrack, and I absolutely despise that rendition of the main theme, but once again, stay tuned in the future to hear my thoughts on that. Weirdly, it plays the All-Stars music for bonus rooms in the Coin Heavens, but solely in the Coin Heavens, and it doesn't play the unique boss songs from All-Stars. But that's really it. And this is a port of the original game and not just a reskin of the All-Stars version with the original graphics. That being said, there is some weird stuff going on with it. For one, when you pause the game, there is no sound effect and the music keeps playing uninterrupted. And also, all of the enemies that come out of the fake Bowsers spawn in as actual enemies. And for whatever reason, you can't kill the real Bowser with a fire flower. This one just feels unnecessary, like it ruined the joke with the PC Engine and Mega Drive versions. But whatever, it does count as another NES game ported to the SNES, even if it's a bootleg. But guess what? There was another version of Super Mario Bros. Ported to the Super Nintendo by Infidelity. Infidelity has been working hard porting loads of other NES games to the Super Nintendo as well. It's really the most straightforward port, though they have made a version with mouse support with a custom editor. The sound's a little off, but it's nowhere near as bad as Wrecking Crew. I only talked about these ports of Super Mario Bros. Because I thought the PC Engine and Mega Drive ones were interesting. In the end, no official adapter allowing for backwards compatibility was released for the Super Nintendo or Super Famicom. Well, except for the Super Game Boy, but that's not what I'm talking about here. Meanwhile, in 1989, barely 3 months after the console launched, Sega released one for the Mega Drive that allowed it to play Master System games. So, Sega never had to re-release any Master System games to that system. But weirdly, there was one exception. Phantasy Star Fukokuban was released exclusively in Japan as part of a contest in 1994 and is a port of the Master System game to the Mega Drive. It seems the reason they did this was because a lot of new fans who had played the Mega Drive Phantasy Star games wanted a way to experience the original, but it was too difficult to find in stores. So Sega did this as a way to throw them a bone. Of course, nowadays, we don't have to worry about this stuff. The second the Switch 2 was revealed, Yes, it can play all of your Switch games. Backwards compatibility has become the norm, which is great, but I think things are a little less interesting because of it. It's pretty interesting to see the unique ways they used to work around backwards compatibility back in the day, even if a lot of these ports aren't great. But hey, we did get some of that with the Switch. If you would like to see more videos like this in the future, let me know. Also, let me know if I missed anything. Again, yeah, this is a remake of a video I put out earlier, and I decided to remake it because there were a lot of errors and misinformation in that video, and I was very unhappy with it. The reason why it turned out that way is because halfway through working on the original version of this video, I was more focused on working on my next video, so stay tuned for that. But that video's done, and if you're watching this past March 24th, 2025, it's already up, and I highly suggest you watch it. I put a lot of effort and passion into it. Thanks to the helpful people in the comments of the original video for correcting my mistakes. If you want to watch the original for whatever reason, the link is in the description. But I'd rather you watch my next video because I put a lot of effort into it and I really want people to watch it. But thank you for watching this video. Massive thank you to my Patreon supporters as well. Have a wonderful day.